Her hand was trembling, not the kind of tremble you get from nerves or cold air. No, this was the kind that crawls up from somewhere deep in your gut, the kind that starts in your chest and radiates outward until your fingertips feel like they belong to someone else. The kind that happens when your body understands something your mind hasn't fully accepted yet. She was about to do something insane. Vivian Moreau stood at the edge of a crowd worth more than some countries. Billionaires, titans of industry, media moguls, surgeons whose hands had saved thousands of lives, and her, a waitress in a pressed black uniform, making $11 an hour plus tips, carrying a silver tray of sparkling rose that cost more per glass than her electricity bill. In her left palm, folded twice and damp with sweat, was a cocktail napkin. 5 words, written in handwriting so shaky it barely looked like her own. Across the terrace, under a spotlight that turned him golden, the most powerful man in the room lifted a champagne flute to his lips. She had 11 seconds, maybe less, and those 5 words, if she could get them to him in time, would stop a murder, expose a $200 million conspiracy, and bind 2 strangers together in a way neither of them could have ever predicted. But to understand why a waitress making $11 an hour was about to save the life of a billionaire CEO, we need to go back to the beginning. Have you ever overheard something you weren't supposed to? Something that made your blood run cold? Now imagine what you heard could get you killed. Tonight, a man is about to drink champagne laced with something designed to stop his heart. And the only person who knows is a woman the entire room doesn't even see. What would you do? Stay silent and stay safe, or risk everything for a stranger? Stay until the end, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. The rooftop terrace of the Lumiere Grand Hotel shimmered against the Los Angeles night sky, like something pulled from a fever dream. Strings of amber lights crisscrossed above an infinity pool that reflected the city's glittering skyline in rippling streaks of gold and silver. Towering arrangements of white orchids flanked every table, their petals so perfect they looked sculpted from porcelain. A jazz trio played something smooth and unhurried from a raised platform near the bar, their saxophone breathing low and warm over the hum of conversation. And there was conversation everywhere, laughter that sparkled brighter than the champagne, deals being sealed with handshakes, alliances being forged over canapes. The air itself smelled expensive, a cocktail of designer cologne, night-blooming jasmine from the rooftop garden, and the intoxicating scent of money. Tonight was no ordinary gathering. Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the biotech giant that had revolutionized gene therapy treatments for rare childhood diseases, was celebrating a landmark acquisition. 3 international research laboratories, absorbed in a deal the Wall Street Journal had called the most significant biotech merger in a decade. Everyone who mattered in the worlds of finance, technology, and medicine had flown in to raise a glass and be seen doing it. And at the center of it all, like the sun around which every planet orbited, stood Dominic Ashford, 34 years old, founder, CEO, the man whose name had become synonymous with ambition, brilliance, and the kind of quiet, relentless power that doesn't need to announce itself. He wore a midnight blue suit that fit him like armor, his dark hair swept back, his jaw clean-shaven, his posture radiating control. When he spoke, people leaned in. When he paused, rooms went quiet. He was the kind of man who could command a stadium with a whisper. But if you looked closely, and most people didn't, you'd notice the faint shadows pooling beneath his deep brown eyes. The tension threaded through his shoulders like steel wire pulled too tight. The way his smile, polished and practiced, never quite reached the corners of his mouth. There was a heaviness to him tonight that no amount of tailoring could disguise. Because Dominic Ashford was not celebrating, he was counting the faces in the room, counting the exits, counting the days since he discovered something inside his own company that made him question everything and everyone around him. Dominic had been forged in hardship, abandoned as an infant on the steps of a fire station in Detroit, wrapped in a threadbare blanket with no note, no name, no explanation. He grew up cycling through foster homes, some merely indifferent, others actively cruel. By 14, he had learned a truth most adults never grasp. No one was coming to save him, so he saved himself. A full scholarship to MIT, a doctoral thesis on molecular gene editing that caught the eye of every pharmaceutical giant in the country. And then, at 26, the audacious, borderline reckless decision to reject every offer and start his own company with nothing but a prototype formula, $12,000 in savings, and a conviction that burned so hot it left scorch marks on everything it touched. 8 years later, Meridian Pharmaceuticals was valued at over $9 billion. Its treatments had reached children in 43 countries. Dominic Ashford's name was spoken in the same breath as the greatest innovators of his generation. But empires have cracks. And 3 weeks ago, Dominic had discovered one so deep it threatened to swallow everything whole. He stood at the edge of the terrace, champagne flute untouched in his hand, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to celebrate him. And behind his calm, composed exterior, a single thought pulsed like a heartbeat. Someone in this room wants me dead before midnight. He just didn't know who. Not yet. On the other side of the terrace, in the spaces between the glamour and the golden light, a different world existed entirely. It was the world of people who carried the trays, who refilled the glasses, who cleared the plates and swept the crumbs and moved so quietly through the crowd that they might as well have been furniture. They were invisible, and that invisibility was by design. Vivienne Moreau moved through this world with the kind of practiced grace that only comes from doing something so many times it becomes muscle memory. Auburn hair pinned up beneath a neat twist, hazel eyes cast downward just enough to avoid direct contact with the guests, but alert enough to anticipate the lift of a hand or the tilt of an empty glass. Silver tray balanced on her right palm like an extension of her body. She was 26 years old, and she had been invisible for most of her life, not by choice, by circumstance, by the slow grinding machinery of a world that decides early on who matters and who doesn't, and then makes sure the ones who don't never forget it. But behind every invisible person is a story that would bring most people to their knees. 4 years ago, Vivienne's mother had been found unconscious in the bathroom of their 2-bedroom apartment in Koreatown. Overdose. The paramedics arrived 11 minutes too late. 3 months after that, her father, drowning in grief and bad decisions, was arrested for fraud and sentenced to 7 years. Just like that, at 22 years old, Vivienne went from college student with a 3.8 gigapascals and dreams of law school to sole legal guardian of her 4-year-old brother, Luca. He was 8 now. Curly dark hair, eyes too large for his face, a laugh that could fill a room, and a spirit that burned so bright it almost made you forget how fragile the body carrying it actually was. Luca had a degenerative respiratory condition, the kind that required daily medication, monthly specialist visits, and an inhaler that went everywhere he went, tucked into the pocket of whatever oversized hoodie Vivienne could find at the thrift store. The medication alone cost more than her rent, so Vivienne worked 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep on a good night. She waitressed at a diner in the mornings, did data entry for a temp agency in the afternoons, and worked events like this one at night because the tips were better, and sometimes, if she was lucky, she could pocket leftover food from the kitchen to bring home. Tonight, Luca was downstairs, lobby level, tucked into a quiet corner near the concierge desk, cross-legged on a leather bench, hunched over a coloring book, his inhaler in his right pocket, a juice box on the cushion beside him. Vivienne had promised she'd be done by 10. She always kept her promises to Luca. He was the one person in her life she would never let down. She moved between tables now, refilling glasses, collecting empties, her mind already half planning the walk home. 2 buses and a 15-minute walk. Luca would fall asleep on her shoulder during the second transfer, the way he always did. She'd carry him the last 3 blocks. She didn't envy the people at this party. She didn't resent their wealth or their ease. She simply existed in a parallel dimension, close enough to see their world, but separated by a barrier as real and impenetrable as glass. She just needed to get through tonight. Pick up Luca, walk home, sleep, do it again tomorrow. She had no idea that in less than 10 minutes she would overhear something that would change the course of her life and the life of every single person in this room. It happened because of a shortcut. The kitchens at the Lumiere Grand were on the east side of the building, but the terrace was accessed from the west. During big events, the servers used the main corridor, which meant navigating around security checkpoints, coat check stations, and clusters of guests who had wandered indoors. It added 5 minutes to every trip, but Vivienne knew a faster route. A narrow service hallway that cut behind the very important person lounge and connected directly to the kitchen service elevator. She'd discovered it during her second event at the hotel, and she used it every time since. It shaved minutes off each run, and on nights like this, Minutes mattered. She was halfway through the corridor, tray empty, heading back for a refill, when she heard the voices, low, urgent, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but pressurized, like steam building behind a sealed valve. The door to the very important person lounge was cracked open, maybe 2 inches, just enough for sound to bleed through, just enough for words to escape. Vivian slowed, then stopped. She knew she should keep walking. Every instinct built from years of staying small, staying quiet, staying out of trouble told her to move. But something in the tone of those voices pinned her feet to the floor. 3 men. She could hear 3 distinct voices. 2 she didn't recognize. But the third voice was unmistakable, smooth, precise, the kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms and the back seats of town cars. She had heard it dozens of times over the past 2 years, always at events like this one, always accompanied by silver hair and an expensive smile and the casual authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Preston Hale, Meridian Pharmaceuticals' chief financial officer, a regular guest at the Lumiere Grand. Vivian had served him champagne more times than she could count. His voice carried through the crack in the door with chilling clarity. He's getting too close. The audit trail leads straight back to the Kensington accounts. If he presents that data on Monday, we are finished. A second voice, gravelly and impatient, responded. Then it doesn't reach Monday. The drink's been prepared, cardiac event, clean, untraceable. Once he raises his glass for the toast, it's over. A third voice, quieter, almost clinical. And the research files? Preston answered without hesitation. Already handled. His personal server was cloned last night. We'll destroy the originals, and by morning, Dominic Ashford will be a tragic headline. And we'll be signing the Kensington contracts before lunch. Silence. Then a low murmur of agreement, and the sound of glasses clinking. Vivian's blood turned to ice. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. Her hands began to shake. The empty tray in her grip rattled faintly, and she clamped down on it with both hands, pressing it against her stomach to stop the sound. Her breathing went shallow. Her vision narrowed. She stepped back. 1 step. 2. Careful. Silent. The hallway felt like it had stretched to a mile, and every footfall sounded like thunder in her ears. She made it around the corner before her legs nearly gave out. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes, her chest heaving. Walk away. The voice in her head screamed, you didn't hear anything. Finish your shift. Get Luca. Go home. This has nothing to do with you. But it did. Because the Kensington Initiative, the program those men were protecting with murder, was the same program that subsidized Luca's medication. The same program that had kept her brother breathing for the past 3 years. The same program built by Dominic Ashford's company. If Dominic died tonight, what happened to that program? What happened to the thousands of children who depended on it? What happened to Luca? She couldn't save her mother. She couldn't save her father. But maybe, just maybe, she could save him. Her hand dove into her apron pocket. She pulled out a cocktail napkin and a pen. Her fingers shook so violently she could barely grip the pen, but she pressed it to the paper and wrote 5 words: messy, desperate, real. She folded the napkin twice, tucked it into her left palm, and walked back toward the terrace on legs that felt like they belonged to someone braver than she had ever been. The spotlight found Dominic like a crown of light descending from the heavens. He had stepped onto the small raised platform near the infinity pool, and the crowd had instinctively hushed, the way crowds do when power enters a room. An attendant materialized beside him and placed a champagne flute in his hand. The glass caught the light and glowed amber. Beautiful, elegant, and lethal. Dominic held it loosely, casually, the way a man holds something he trusts. He turned toward the microphone, cleared his throat softly, and began scanning the faces before him. Every one of them was smiling. He was seconds from raising his glass. Vivienne was already moving. She crossed the terrace with her tray raised, her expression blank, her pace steady. Just another server navigating the sea of silk and champagne. She kept her eyes forward, but tracked Dominic in her peripheral vision, calculating the distance, the angle, the timing. 15 feet. 10. 5. She reached the edge of the stage, just as Dominic turned toward the microphone. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was polite, practiced, perfectly calibrated to sound like nothing more than a minor interruption. I'm so sorry. Wrong glass. Yours was the reserve vintage. She reached for his champagne flute with her right hand, her fingers brushing the stem. With her left, she pressed the folded cocktail napkin into his palm. Their fingers touched, and in that fraction of a second, something transferred between them that had nothing to do with paper and everything to do with urgency. Her touch was electric with fear. Her eyes, when they met his, were wide and unblinking, and begging him to understand without words. Dominic's brow furrowed, almost imperceptibly. He glanced down at his hand. The napkin sat against his palm like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Vivian stepped back, tray raised, disappearing into the crowd the way she had appeared, like smoke, like a ghost, like someone who had never been there at all. Dominic unfolded the napkin beneath the edge of the podium. His eyes dropped. 5 words, scrawled in shaking handwriting. Don't drink it. Get out. They're going to kill you. The world stopped. Not literally, of course. The jazz trio kept playing. The laughter kept rippling. The champagne kept flowing. But inside Dominic Ashford's mind, every assumption, every certainty, every thread of trust he had woven through this evening snapped simultaneously, like guy wires cut from a bridge. He looked up at the room. The same faces, the same smiles, the same warm golden light. But now, everything looked different. The smiles were sharper. The glances lingered a beat too long. The laughter sounded rehearsed. The room, which 10 seconds ago had felt like a celebration, now felt like a stage, and he was the only actor who didn't know the script. His mind moved fast, because that's what survival teaches you. Not to panic, not to freeze, to think, to calculate, to move. He set the champagne flute down on the podium without drinking. Then he leaned into the microphone, his voice smooth and unhurried. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight. Before we toast, I've just been reminded of something I need to attend to briefly. Please enjoy the evening. I'll return shortly. Polite laughter. A few understanding nods. No alarm. He stepped off the stage, loosened his collar with one hand, and scanned the terrace. There, moving toward the service corridor near the kitchen entrance, auburn hair, black uniform, the woman who had just pressed 5 words into his hand. He followed. Now before we continue, if this story already has your heart racing, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed to Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible yet, what are you waiting for? Trust me, you are not ready for what happens next. He caught up to her just inside the corridor, where the terrace lights gave way to fluorescent overheads, and the jazz faded into the mechanical hum of kitchen ventilation. The glamour evaporated. Out here, the world was linoleum and concrete, and the faint smell of industrial cleaner. Stop. His voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable weight of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Not harsh, not aggressive, but absolute. Vivian turned. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Her eyes were wide, her jaw tight, and her fingers gripped the edge of her tray so hard her knuckles had gone white. You wrote this. He held up the napkin. She nodded once. How do you know? I heard them. Her voice was low, unsteady, but clear. 3 men, in the very important person lounge. One of them was your CFO, Preston Hale. Something moved behind Dominic's eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. The look of a man whose worst suspicion had just been validated by a stranger. What exactly did you hear? She told him every word. The Kensington accounts, the cloned server, the prepared drink, the phrase that had lodged in her chest like a shard of glass. By morning, Dominic Ashford will be a tragic headline. When she finished, the corridor felt smaller. The silence between them was thick, almost solid, as if the air itself had compressed under the weight of what she'd just revealed. Dominic's jaw clenched. His hand curled into a fist at his side, then slowly released. Come with me, he said. She pulled back instinctively, a reflex born from years of protecting herself, of trusting no one, of understanding that the world did not hand out safety for free. I can't. My brother. He's downstairs. He's alone. The shift in Dominic's expression was immediate and startling. The corporate mask, the controlled authority, the CEO, it all fell away. What remained was raw, unguarded, human concern. How old? 8. A beat of silence. Then, We get him first." They moved fast, down the service elevator, through narrow corridors that smelled of laundry detergent and old carpet, past storage rooms and electrical panels, and all the hidden infrastructure that kept the beautiful machine of the hotel running. Dominic led the way with a certainty that surprised her, as if he had navigated back corridors and service exits his entire life. And in a way, he had. The orphan from Detroit knew what it felt like to move through the world's unseen spaces. They reached the lobby in 4 minutes. Vivienne spotted Luca immediately. He was exactly where she'd left him, cross-legged on the leather bench in the corner, his coloring book open to a page of jungle animals, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Luca," Vivienne called softly, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. He looked up, beamed. "Vivi, are you done already?" "Not yet, sweetheart, but we need to go." His eyes shifted to the tall man standing behind his sister. He studied Dominic with the unfiltered, unwavering scrutiny that only children possess, the kind of gaze that sees past suits and titles and lands directly on the truth of a person. "Who's he?" Dominic crouched to Luca's level, his entire demeanor transformed. The tension in his shoulders dissolved. His voice, which minutes ago had been clipped and commanding, became impossibly disarmingly gentle. "I'm a friend of your sister's. She did something really brave tonight, and I'm going to make sure you're both safe. That okay?" Luca considered this with the gravity of someone much older than 8. Then he nodded solemnly. "Okay." Dominic reached for his wrist and unclasped his watch, a sleek titanium piece that caught the lobby light like a small moon. He held it out to the boy. "Hold on to this for me." Luca's eyes went wide. He took it carefully, reverently, turning it over in his small hands. "It's heavy." "Good things usually are," Dominic said, and something in his voice suggested he wasn't just talking about the watch. Vivienne stood frozen, watching this exchange, and felt something crack open in her chest, something she had sealed shut years ago, bricked over with survival and exhaustion and the relentless daily math of keeping 2 lives afloat. She had built walls, thick ones, against disappointment, against hope, against the dangerous fantasy that someone might actually show up and care. And now here was this man, this billionaire, this stranger, kneeling on the marble floor of a hotel lobby in front of her little brother, treating him like he was the most important person in the building. Her throat burned. She blinked hard and looked away. Dominic stood, placed his hand gently on Luca's shoulder, and looked at Vivienne. "Let's go." His driver was waiting at the service entrance. Within minutes, the 3 of them were cutting through the neon-streaked streets of downtown Los Angeles, the city's restless energy humming outside tinted windows. Luca sat between them in the back seat, already drowsy, his head tilting toward Vivienne's arm. Dominic made one call during the drive. His voice dropped low, controlled, urgent. "Gabrielle, it's Dominic. I need you at the Whitmore address. Now. Yes, bring the secure case. And Gabrielle, it's worse than we thought." He hung up and stared out the window. The city blurred past. Somewhere behind them, in that glittering rooftop ballroom, a glass of poisoned champagne sat untouched on a podium, and the men who had prepared it were beginning to wonder why their target hadn't taken a single sip. The loft was not what Vivienne expected. She had imagined glass walls and smart panels and the kind of cold, clinical luxury that screams money from every surface. But when Dominic led them up the freight elevator of a converted warehouse in the Arts District and unlocked the heavy steel door, what she found instead stopped her in her tracks. Warmth, exposed brick walls the color of burnt sienna, bookshelves stretching from floor to ceiling, overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks and leather-bound volumes and stacked journals held together with rubber bands, a worn reading chair positioned beside a window that overlooked a small courtyard garden, soft rugs layered over polished concrete floors, and on the walls, framed sketches, some clearly done by a child's hand, their crayon lines wild and joyful, pinned with the same care as the museum-quality prints beside them. It felt lived in. It felt real. "This doesn't look like a billionaire's place," Vivienne murmured, still standing in the doorway. Dominic set his keys on the counter and gave a faint smile. "That's because it isn't. It's mine." He showed her to the guest room, small but clean, with soft sheets and a reading lamp that cast a warm glow. Luca was already half asleep, and Vivienne carried him to the bed, removed his sneakers, pulled the covers up, and pressed her lips to his forehead. She lingered there for a moment, watching his breathing steady, the inhaler clutched loosely in his right hand, and felt the full weight of the night press down on her shoulders. When she returned to the main room, Dominic was at a wide oak desk, folders spread before him. A compact laptop glowed softly beside a leather journal, filled with dense, meticulous handwriting. He reached behind a row of books on the shelf, pressed a small latch, and a panel slid open, revealing a wall safe. He dialed the combination, paused, then opened it. Inside, a stack of labeled folders, a flash drive, and more notebooks. He pulled out the top folder and placed it on the desk. Then he looked at her. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice measured and quiet. I was reviewing a quarterly audit when I noticed discrepancies in one of our subsidiary programs, specifically something called the Kensington Initiative. Vivian's breath caught. She knew that name. It was designed to fund pediatric respiratory treatments for children in underserved communities, he continued. On the surface, everything looked clean, but the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Payments to fabricated research partners, entities that existed only on paper, funds earmarked for medication subsidies and clinical trials being rerouted into offshore accounts through a chain of shell companies. He slid a sheet of paper toward her. Columns of numbers, account names, transaction dates. She scanned it, not understanding every detail but grasping the shape of it, the architecture of theft. I traced the authorization codes, Dominic said. Every single one led back to the same person, Preston Hale. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Hale has been negotiating a private sale behind the company's back, selling our proprietary gene therapy research data to a competing pharmaceutical firm overseas. The embezzlement funded the entire operation, over $200 million in play. Vivian's hands pressed flat against the desk. She needed to feel something solid because the ground beneath her was shifting. The Kensington Initiative, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca's medication, the subsidized inhaler program, that's part of Kensington, Dominic finished. Yes. The room contracted around her. The numbers on the page blurred, because these weren't abstract figures on a spreadsheet. This was her brother's breath, his lungs, his life. The medication that kept him alive was funded by a program that had been gutted from the inside, by men in expensive suits who saw children like Luca as nothing more than a line item to be erased. Fury rose in her chest like a tide, slow and unstoppable and ancient. You were going to expose him, she said. On Monday, I had everything prepared. An airtight presentation for the board, external auditors on standby, legal counsel ready to move. He paused. But someone found out I was investigating. 3 days ago, I received an anonymous message. One sentence. Drop it, or you'll regret it. And you didn't stop. I thought it was an empty threat. I've had worse thrown at me over the years. His voice softened, carrying something that sounded almost like regret. I underestimated how much was at stake for them, and how far they'd go to protect it. A knock at the door cut through the silence. Dominic opened it to reveal a woman in her early 40s, sharp-featured with dark skin and close-cropped natural hair, dressed entirely in tactical black. She moved into the room with the kind of precision that comes from 15 years in federal law enforcement. Gabrielle Torres, former FBI, left the bureau 3 years ago, now worked private investigations, specializing in corporate fraud and white-collar crime. She scanned the room once, assessed Vivian in a single glance, and then turned to Dominic. Tell me everything, she said. Now listen, if you're watching this and you're feeling what Vivian felt in that moment, that fire in your chest, that sense that something deeply wrong needs to be made right, drop a comment below. Tell me, would you have had the courage to slip that note? And while you're at it, share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. Let's keep going. For the next 48 hours, the loft became a war room. Gabrielle worked with surgical precision, verifying every financial document, cross-referencing shell companies through international registries, tracing offshore account numbers through a network of contacts she'd built over nearly 2 decades. She made one discreet call to a federal prosecutor she trusted, a woman she'd worked with on 3 prior cases. I'm sending you something, was all she said. You'll want to clear your schedule. Dominic compiled the evidence into a presentation so airtight it could have survived a hurricane. Every receipt, every authorization code, every email thread between Hale and the overseas buyer. He organized it chronologically, cross-referenced it with internal memos, and created 3 encrypted backup copies, each stored with a different independent legal firm. And Vivian, quiet, observant, fueled by a determination that surprised even herself, helped organize the paper trail. She sorted documents, flagged inconsistencies, and created timelines on a whiteboard Dominic had pulled from a closet. Gabrielle watched her work for nearly an hour before speaking. "You've got an analyst's mind." Vivian didn't look up. "I've got a survivor's mind." Gabrielle said nothing more, but the faintest ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Between the hours of investigation and planning, in the spaces between urgency, something else was happening. Something neither Dominic nor Vivienne named, because naming it would have made it real, and real things can be lost. It lived in the small moments. He brought her coffee without being asked. Black, 2 sugars. He'd noticed how she made it the first morning, and simply remembered. She caught him watching her once, twice, 3 times, always looking away a beat too late, as if he'd been studying something he didn't fully understand. Luca, oblivious to the storm swirling around them, became the loft's unlikely center of gravity. He colored at the kitchen table while they worked. He asked Dominic to read him a story before bed, and Dominic, this man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers and stood toe-to-toe with senators, sat on the floor beside the guest bed and read about a rabbit who wanted to go to the moon, doing all the voices. One evening, Luca fell asleep between them on the worn leather couch, his small body curled into the space separating 2 people who had both known, deeply and painfully, what it means to be alone. His breathing was soft and steady, the inhaler still clutched in one hand, and for a long moment, neither Dominic nor Vivian moved. They just sat there in the lamplight, listening to the sound of a child breathing easy, and something shifted in the room. Something that felt like the beginning of a family that had no name and no blueprint but existed all the same. Late on the second night, Vivienne couldn't sleep. She wandered through the loft and found the door to the rooftop terrace cracked open. Dominic was standing at the railing, staring out at the city. Los Angeles, at 2 in the morning, is a strange and lonely thing. A galaxy of lights with no one looking up. She stepped out beside him. The air was cool and smelled of night jasmine from the courtyard below. "You could have ignored my note," she said. He turned his head slightly. "You could have ignored what you heard." "I almost did, but you didn't." Silence. The distant sound of a siren, rising and falling, then gone. "Why did you trust me?" she asked. "You didn't know me. I could have been anyone. I could have been part of it." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. Stripped of the authority and control she'd come to associate with him, it was just a man talking. "When you pressed that napkin into my hand, your fingers were shaking, but you didn't look away. You looked right at me, straight into my eyes, and I thought, whoever this woman is, she's more afraid of staying silent than she is of the danger. And that told me everything I needed to know." Vivian's eyes glistened. She blinked, but didn't look away. "No one's ever looked at me the way you did in that moment," she said. "How?" "Like I was visible." The word hung in the air between them. Simple and devastating. Visible. Such a small word to carry such enormous weight. To be seen, to be recognized, to matter. Dominic reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, the way he had at the hotel. Gently, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. They stood there at the edge of the city, 2 people forged in fire, finding rest in each other's presence. And something passed between them that neither of them tried to define, because some things are too fragile for words and too strong to break. Wednesday morning arrived like a blade of light cutting through storm clouds. Dominic dressed with intention, charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw for the first time in years, not the CEO, not the orphan, not the target, but the man, clear-eyed, ready. At Meridian headquarters, the 62nd floor boardroom was already full. The emergency meeting had been called by Preston Hale himself under the pretense of addressing concerns about the CEO's unexplained absence and the urgent need for interim leadership. Around the long glass conference table sat a familiar collection of power. Board members, department heads, legal counsel, polished shoes, tailored suits, calm expressions calibrated to project confidence while concealing the quiet, gnawing unease that had settled over the company like fog. Everyone wondered the same thing. Was Dominic Ashford dead? Or Was he planning something? Hale stood at the head of the table, silver hair impeccable, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a man who had spent decades being trusted. "Mr. Ashford has taken an indefinite leave of absence," he announced smoothly. "We need to move forward. Interim leadership, pending contracts. There's no time to wait." Board members nodded. Pens moved across legal pads. The machinery of corporate transition began to turn. At the far end of the room, a young woman in a catering uniform entered, carrying a tray of coffee. "Coffee, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice soft and unremarkable. No one gave her more than a glance. Vivienne, her auburn hair tucked beneath a black service cap, her eyes cast carefully downward, set cups at each seat with practiced ease. But beneath her tray, secured with tape to the underside, was a small transmitter. And inside the air vent above the east wall, a recorder placed there at 4 o'clock that morning by Gabriel Torres was capturing every word. 2 blocks away, inside a nondescript surveillance van parked between a food truck and a delivery vehicle, Gabrielle sat with headphones on, her fingers adjusting the frequency with the delicacy of a surgeon. Beside her, Dominic leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on a small monitor showing a grainy feed from a camera disguised as a smoke detector. The boardroom conversation continued, and then, the moment they had been waiting for arrived. Harlan Dent, a legal advisor in his mid-50s, shifted in his seat and muttered under his breath, the kind of aside meant only for the man beside him but picked up with perfect clarity by the hidden mic. "Even if he has the originals, it's too late. He's probably on a jet somewhere or buried in a ditch." A low, cold chuckle from 2 seats down. Another board member added, barely louder, "If he's smart, he'll stay gone. We've already locked in the votes." Hale didn't respond, but the faintest curl of a smirk crossed his thin lips. In the van, Gabrielle pressed a small button on the transmitter panel, sending a silent signal. Inside the boardroom, Vivian took one slow step back from the table, and then the doors opened. Every head turned. Dominic Ashford walked in, calm, composed, and unmistakably, impossibly alive. The room didn't just go silent, it went airless, as if someone had opened a hatch at 40,000 feet and all the oxygen had been sucked into the void. Hale rose halfway from his chair, his complexion draining to the color of ash. "Dominic, we weren't expecting—" "I'm sure you weren't." Dominic's voice was cool and precise as a scalpel. He strode to the head of the table, his footsteps the only sound in the room, and every person at that table tracked him the way prey tracks a predator. He laid a thick dossier on the glass surface. The sound of it landing echoed. "Please," he said, scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Don't get up on my account." No one moved. No one breathed. "I heard concerns about my absence," he continued, his voice carrying the kind of calm that is more terrifying than any shout. "Understandable. I needed time. Time to think. Time to collect a few facts." He opened the dossier and slid a stack of documents across the glass. "You know," he said, his gaze locking onto Hale like a targeting system, "it's bold. Deciding the future of a company based on the assumption that its founder is either dead or too afraid to return." Hale opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "No explanations," Dominic said, raising a hand. "I've already heard enough." He addressed the full board now, his voice steady, methodical, devastating. "This folder contains financial records, email threads, shell account details, authorization codes, and names." He let the last word land like a hammer. "Copies have already been sent to federal investigators, the SEC, and our external legal counsel, and if needed, the press." A ripple of alarm moved through the room, chairs creaking, pens dropping, hands reaching for phones that suddenly felt like liabilities. Dominic leaned forward, both palms flat on the table, and delivered the checkmate. "And in case anyone still thinks this is a bluff, I've sent encrypted copies to 3 independent legal firms with instructions to release everything publicly if anything at all happens to me. This information does not die with me." He straightened slowly, turned to Hale, looked him directly in the eyes. "I wanted to believe this company could fix itself from within. I gave people chances. I believed in discretion." A pause, then the final blow, delivered in a voice low enough to be intimate, but clear enough to reach every corner of the room. "But the truth didn't die. I didn't die. And neither did the evidence." Silence, absolute and total, held the room in its grip for 5 full seconds. Then chaos. Board members turned on each other. Legal counsel scrambled for doors. Hale gripped the edge of the table as if the floor had tilted beneath him, his composure finally, irreparably shattered. And Dominic stood at the center of the storm, still, steady, unbreakable. The orphan from Detroit who had crawled out of nothing and built something extraordinary and refused, absolutely refused, to let anyone take it from him. His eyes found Vivian near the service door. She had removed the cap. Her auburn hair fell across her shoulders. She stood straight, chin raised, hazel eyes burning with something fierce and proud and uncontainable. He nodded once. She nodded back, and in that silent exchange across a room full of shattered illusions, everything that needed to be said was said without a single word. Wow! If that moment didn't give you chills, I don't know what will. Listen, if you've made it this far, you're part of this journey now. Smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because the stories on Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible will always leave you feeling something real. Now let me tell you what happened next, because we're not done yet. 1 week later, the press conference at Meridian Pharmaceuticals headquarters drew the largest media gathering the company had ever seen. Cameras lined the back wall in a solid bank of lenses and LED indicators. Lights blazed from every angle, turning the podium into a stage and the room into a theater. Reporters packed the seats, laptops open, phones recording. Shareholders clustered near the exits, some anxious, some hopeful, all waiting for the words that would determine what came next. Dominic Ashford stood at the podium, navy suit, no tie, composed but different now. A quiet warmth in his expression that hadn't been there before, as if something rigid inside him had finally softened. To his left stood company legal counsel. To his right, a screen displayed the Meridian logo with one bold word beneath it: transparency. He scanned the room and began. Thank you for being here. I speak today not just as CEO, but as someone who came close to losing everything because I refused to look the other way. He let the silence settle before continuing. In recent weeks, I discovered serious misconduct within one of our key programs, the Kensington Initiative. A foundation designed to fund pediatric medical outreach had been systematically gutted. From the inside, millions of dollars diverted into private accounts. Proprietary research sold to foreign competitors, all of it authorized by members of our own leadership. A low murmur moved through the crowd, like a current. Using internal documentation and the support of independent investigators, I have turned over all evidence to federal authorities. Arrests have been made. Meridian is cooperating fully. Phones buzzed. Keyboards clicked. But Dominic held the room with his eyes. This moment, however, is not only about corruption. It's about courage, about choosing truth when silence feels safer, about doing what's right when doing nothing is so much easier. He paused, then gestured to the edge of the stage. None of this would have been possible without one person. Someone who saw something wrong and chose to act, not for reward, not for recognition, but because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent. Every head in the room turned. Vivian Lane walked onto the stage. She wore a simple ivory blouse and dark trousers. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She was nervous, anyone could see that, but she held her chin high and her shoulders back, and she walked with the quiet, unshakable dignity of someone who had survived things these people couldn't imagine. The event host stepped to the microphone. This is Vivian Moreau, a part-time waitress and full-time guardian who refused to stay silent. In doing so, she saved not only the life of our CEO, but the future of this company and the thousands of children who depend on its programs. The applause was immediate, deep, resonant, real, not the polished, performative clapping of a corporate event, but something that came from the gut, raw and grateful and full of recognition. Vivian hesitated, overwhelmed by the sound, by the lights, by the magnitude of the moment. Then Dominic held out his hand. She took it, and as they stood together, the applause swelled. There was no hierarchy between them now. No CEO and waitress, no billionaire and minimum wage worker. Just two human beings who had looked into the dark and chosen not to turn away. Then Dominic stepped forward and reached into the front row. He bent down and gently lifted a small figure onto the stage. Luca. He wore a brand new jacket and clean sneakers. His dark curls were freshly cut, and his eyes, those enormous, ancient eyes, scanned the crowd with a mixture of wonder and solemnity. He wasn't carrying his inhaler. For the first time in years, he didn't need to. Dominic had personally ensured he received the best treatment available through Meridian's reinstated Kensington program. The room went quiet. Luca blinked under the lights, then tugged on Dominic's sleeve. The tug that 8-year-olds give when they have something important to say. "Is this the brave part?" he whispered. Dominic knelt beside him, lowering the microphone, and looked into the boy's eyes with a tenderness that made half the room's hardened journalists reach for tissues. "This is exactly the brave part." He stood, took a breath, and faced the crowd one final time. "If we want to raise children who are brave, honest, and kind," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "we have to show them what that looks like. We can't just tell them to do the right thing. We have to do it ourselves, loudly, publicly, even when it costs us something." He looked at Vivian, then at Luca, then back at the hundreds of faces watching. Sometimes it only takes one voice, one person who says, "This is wrong," when no one else will. He placed Luca's hand gently in Vivian's. The boy looked up at his sister, then at Dominic, then wrapped his free hand around Dominic's fingers, connecting the three of them in a chain. They stood there, side by side, an unlikely trio, united not by blood, but by something rarer, and perhaps stronger, by truth, by choice, by the refusal to look away. And the applause that rose was not polite. It was not obligatory. It was thunderous, rising from the floor and filling every corner, and rattling the light fixtures and pressing against the walls as if the room itself couldn't contain it. It was applause for truth, for courage, for the invisible people who turn out to be the bravest ones in the room. Spring arrived in Los Angeles the way it always does, slowly, then all at once. Jacaranda trees erupted in violet along every boulevard, their petals drifting like purple snow across sidewalks and windshields. The light turned golden and forgiving, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory, even as you're living it. Meridian Pharmaceuticals emerged from the storm stronger than before. The toxic leadership had been excised like a tumor. The Kensington Initiative was relaunched with full transparency, an independent oversight board, and an advisory panel that included patient advocates, community health workers, and parents of the children the program served. Dominic still led the company, but he led differently now. He walked the labs. He sat with researchers during lunch. He shook hands with interns and janitors with the same warmth he showed investors and senators. He answered emails from parents whose children were enrolled in clinical trials, writing back personally, sometimes late into the night, because every one of those children reminded him of a boy in a pink hospital gown in a Detroit foster home who had no one to write to. Vivian enrolled in college again. Forensic accounting of all things. Gabrielle Torres wrote her recommendation letter. It was 2 sentences long. "Vivian Moreau is the most courageous person I have ever worked with. Hire her before someone else does." Luca started school full-time. He drew pictures of what he called the night Vivi was brave and taped them to the refrigerator in the loft because, yes, they lived there now. Not because Dominic asked, because Luca had looked up at him one morning over a bowl of cereal and said, "Can we just stay here? It feels like home." And Dominic, who had never known what that word truly meant, had looked at Vivienne across the kitchen, and she had looked back, and neither of them had spoken, and both of them had understood. Late at night, when the documents blurred and the weight of the world pressed in again, Dominic would look up from his desk and find Vivienne in the doorway, 2 mugs of tea, her smile quiet and knowing. She would cross the room and set a mug beside his hand, and their fingers would touch, and neither would pull away. Some stories begin with a whisper, a folded napkin, a trembling hand reaching across the impossible distance between 2 strangers, and sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Before we close, I want to leave you with this. Vivian was terrified that night. Her hands shook. Her legs wanted to run. Every survival instinct she had, every lesson life had beaten into her about staying small and staying safe, screamed at her to walk away. But she didn't. And that is what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And here's the thing most people miss. The most powerful person in that room was never the billionaire. It was the waitress nobody noticed. Because your title doesn't determine your impact. Your position doesn't define your power. The person who changes everything is rarely the one standing in the spotlight. It's the one standing in the shadows who refuses to stay silent. Doing the right thing cost Vivian everything she had. It cost Dominic the illusion of safety. Neither of them chose the easy path, but they chose the one that mattered. And when it was over, they didn't just save a company. They found each other, two people from opposite ends of the world, bound together by a single act of impossible bravery. So the next time life puts you at a crossroads, when staying quiet is easier, when looking away is safer, when the risk of speaking up feels bigger than you can carry, remember, Vivian, remember the napkin. Remember 5 words scrawled by a shaking hand, and ask yourself, what will you choose? If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you believe that one person truly can make a difference, then show some love. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Love Chronicles with Mr. Incredible, and hit that bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Vivian's shoes? I read every single comment, and I'll see you in the next one.